If I were to tell you that the entire national security of the United States, the safety of every city from New York to Los Angeles, is currently being held together by a single aging radar station on a piece of ice that America doesn't even own, you'd think I was describing a plot from a Cold War thriller. But in 2026, this isn't fiction. It is the most shocking and terrifying reality of American defense. Most people see the headlines about the US wanting to buy Greenland, and they see a real estate deal. They see a land grab for oil, or a vanity project for a president. But they are looking at the surface. If you go deeper into the classified bunkers of the Pentagon and the strategy rooms of the Space Force, you'll find a much darker truth. The United States is physically blind to the most dangerous weapons ever created without Greenland. Welcome to the hidden reality of the Arctic fortress. This is the shocking reason why the US needs Greenland. To understand the urgency, we have to start with the Golden Dome and the hypersonic nightmare. For the last 70 years, the US has lived under a shield designed to stop traditional ballistic missiles. These missiles fly in a predictable arc, high into space, where they are easy to spot. But the world changed in the early 2020s. Russia and China have perfected hypersonic glide vehicles and nuclear-capable cruise missiles. These weapons don't fly high, they fly low. They maneuver, they dodge radar, and they fly at over 5 times the speed of sound. The US response is a massive, multi-trillion-dollar initiative known as the Golden Dome, a next-generation missile defense project designed to create a 360-degree shield over North America. But here is the shocking part. The Golden Dome has a fatal flaw. Because of the curvature of the Earth, a hypersonic missile launched from Russia or China and coming over the North Pole would stay below the horizon of every radar in the continental United States until it was too late to stop. There is only one place on the planet that has the high ground to see these missiles before they strike. That place is Patuxent Space Base, formerly Thule, in northwestern Greenland. In January 2026, the Pentagon announced a long-planned deployment of military aircraft and a $25 million upgrade to the runways at Patuxent. Why now? Because the US has realized that its entire defense against a nuclear or hypersonic strike is anchored in Greenland. If the US lost access to Patuxent for even 1 hour, the Golden Dome would have a hole the size of the Arctic. America would be defenseless. The vulnerability is not a lack of missiles, it's the fact that the US is renting the only eyes it has to see them. But the Golden Dome is only the modern layer. To see the true depth of the US obsession with Greenland, we have to look at the ghosts of Project Iceworm. In the 1960s, the US military launched a top-secret project to build a network of mobile nuclear missile launch sites under the Greenland ice sheet. They called it Project Iceworm. They built Camp Century, a city under the ice powered by a portable nuclear reactor. The idea was to have hundreds of missiles that could be moved through tunnels, making them impossible for the Soviets to target. The project was eventually abandoned because the ice sheet moved faster than the engineers expected, crushing the tunnels. But the shocking reality of 2026 is that the US is looking at the ice again. As the permafrost melts and the glaciers retreat, the US is realizing that the geographic depth of Greenland is the only place left where they can hide their most sensitive assets. There are whispers in the intelligence community about a new Camp Century, a project to build deep underground, hardened command and control centers that can survive a first-strike nuclear attack. Greenland isn't just a place for a radar. It is the ultimate doomsday bunker for the American government. The US needs Greenland because it is the only piece of land in the north that is large enough, remote enough, and stable enough to act as the final fallback point for the Western world. The vulnerability is not a lack of bunkers, it's the fact that the American mainland is no longer remote enough to be safe. And then there is the mineral hostage crisis. We are currently in the middle of a global industrial revolution. The transition to green energy and the development of advanced military hardware, like the F-35 fighter jet and the Virginia-class submarine, requires a massive amount of rare earth elements, REEs. But here is the reality. The United States currently imports nearly 80% of its rare earth minerals from a single source, China. Washington has realized that its own defense industrial base is being held hostage. If China decides to stop the export of these minerals tomorrow, the US cannot build another jet, another missile, or another high-tech radar. The American military would be frozen in time. But Greenland is the mineral miracle. Geologists have confirmed that Greenland holds some of the largest untapped deposits of critical minerals on Earth, including the neodymium and dysprosium that the US military is desperate for. In early 2026, the US government began mulling direct investments into Greenlandic mining companies like Amarok to bypass the Chinese monopoly. The shocking reason the US needs Greenland isn't just for the land, it's for the dirt. Washington has decided that it can no longer afford to let China be the refinery of the world. They need a domestic, or at least a continental, supply chain. Greenland is the only place on the planet that can provide the scale of minerals needed to break the Chinese chokehold. The vulnerability is not a lack of technology, it's the fact that the US is building its future with materials controlled by its primary rival. Open loop. But the missiles and the minerals are only the physical symptoms. The most dangerous game is the sovereignty standoff. Greenland is a self-governing territory under the Kingdom of Denmark. For decades, the US has relied on a 1951 defense agreement that allows it to operate bases on the island. But in 2026, that agreement is under fire. Greenland is moving toward total independence, and an independent Greenland is a wild card. If Greenland becomes a sovereign nation, it can choose its own partners. It can choose to let China build civilian airports. It can choose to let Russia dock its research vessels. It can choose to cancel the American military presence entirely. This is why, in January 2026, the US push for a total access deal became so aggressive. Washington isn't just asking for permission anymore. They are demanding a framework that ensures the US has sovereign rights over its strategic interests in Greenland, regardless of what the local government decides. The shocking truth is that the US is willing to risk a rupture in the NATO alliance to secure Greenland. They are telling Denmark and the rest of Europe that the defense of the Arctic is a red line. If the US cannot buy Greenland, they will at least ensure that they control it. The US has realized that in a world of near-Arctic states like China, a friendly neighbor is no longer enough. They need a fortress. The vulnerability is not a lack of allies. It's the fact that the US no longer trusts the stability of the status quo. This brings us to the Gyeonggi Gap and the submarine highway. To understand the naval importance of Greenland, you have to look at a map of the North Atlantic. There is a narrow corridor of water between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, known as the Gyeonggi Gap. This is the only way for the Russian Northern Fleet and potentially a future Chinese Arctic fleet to enter the Atlantic Ocean. During the Cold War, the US and NATO built a massive underwater surveillance network to track every submarine that passed through this gap. In 2026, the Gyeonggi Gap is more important than ever. Russia has developed the Borei-class and Yasen-class submarines, which are quieter and more lethal than anything the Soviets ever had. If these submarines can slip through the Gyeonggi Gap undetected, they can sit off the coast of New York and launch cruise missiles with almost zero warning. Greenland is the western anchor of this gap. Without bases in Greenland, the US cannot maintain the acoustic sensors, the P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft, and the rapid response forces needed to close the door. If the US loses Greenland, the Atlantic Ocean becomes a Russian and Chinese playground. The US would be forced to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to defend its own coastline, a task that is currently handled by closing the gate at Greenland. The vulnerability is not a lack of ships. It's the loss of the gate that keeps the Atlantic safe. But there is a final, even more shocking layer, the Arctic resource race. Beneath the melting ice of Greenland and the Arctic Ocean lies an estimated 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of its undiscovered natural gas. But it's not just about energy, it's about fresh water. As the world enters an era of water scarcity, Greenland's ice sheet, which contains 10% of the world's fresh water, is becoming a strategic asset of unimaginable value. The US isn't just looking at Greenland for the next 10 years, they are looking at the next 100. They are looking at a future where the Arctic is the new Mediterranean, the center of global trade, resources, and life. If the US doesn't secure Greenland now, they are effectively ceding the wealth of the next century to their rivals. China's near-Arctic claim is a clear signal that they intend to be there. Russia's massive military buildup in the north is a signal that they intend to own it. The US needs Greenland because it is the only way to ensure that the Arctic remains a Western-led frontier. The vulnerability is not a lack of resources, it's the risk of being locked out of the world's last great treasure chest. This brings us to the Arctification of global trade. As the Arctic ice melts at a record pace, the geography of the world is being rewritten. The Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route are no longer just dreams. They are becoming viable year-round shipping lanes. These routes are 40% faster than going through the Panama or Suez canals. China has already declared itself a near-Arctic state. They are building a polar Silk Road of ports and sensors. They want to be the gatekeepers of the new global trade. If China or Russia controls the waters around Greenland, they control the Suez of the North. They can decide who gets to trade and at what price. They can monitor every ship that passes between Asia and Europe. For the United States, Greenland is the sentinel of the North Atlantic. It is the key to the Northwest Passage. If the US doesn't own the geography of Greenland, it loses the ability to protect the sea lanes that connect America to its European allies. The vulnerability is not the melting ice. It's the fact that the ice was the only thing protecting the US from its rivals in the north. Finally, we have to talk about the Space Force frontier. Pituffik isn't just about radars, it's about space. In 2026, the US Space Force has made Greenland a central hub for its satellite tracking and space domain awareness missions. Because of its location, Patuxent can see satellites in polar orbits that are invisible to stations in the lower 48 states. In a modern war, the first thing that will be targeted is GPS and communication satellites. If the US loses its eyes in space, it loses its ability to coordinate its military. Greenland is the ground station that keeps the American satellite network alive. Furthermore, the US is exploring the possibility of using Greenland as a launch site for small satellites. Because it is so close to the pole, it is the ideal location to launch satellites into the very orbits that are needed for Arctic surveillance. The US needs Greenland because it is the high ground of the planet, the place from which they can control both the Earth and the space above it. So, why is this so shocking? Because it shows that the United States is no longer the unassailable island it once was. The ocean is no longer a shield, it is a highway. And the front line of American defense has moved from the beaches of Normandy or the jungles of Vietnam to a frozen runway in northwestern Greenland. The US needs Greenland because, without it, the American superpower is a Goliath with a blindfold. They are a nation with the most powerful weapons in history, but no way to see the punch coming. The next time you hear about the controversy over Greenland, don't look at the politics. Look at the upgraded early warning radar. Look at the runway expansions. Look at the rare earth mining permits. Because in the end, Greenland is not just an island. It is the survival of the United States. It is the only thing standing between the American mainland and a world where its enemies can strike with impunity. The fight for Greenland is the fight for the Arctic century, and for the United States, it is a fight they simply cannot afford to lose.